Well, hey, we are diving in this morning to part 2 of the series we started last week called Win the Day. And as we kick things off this morning, I want to tell you about a really kind of a life-changing moment for me that happened in a dental chair. So, all holy moments happen in a dentist chair. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still not sure if it was an angel or just that light they put in your face, Still trying to figure that out. No, I had like a life-changing moment sitting at the dentist one day. Now, to understand it, you got to understand, like, I have a bit of, this is kind of weird to say, I have a bit of a dental history. I have a past when it comes to my teeth, So it starts with this, okay? So like dentists constantly, like when I sit in their chair, they're like, man, your gums, like they're really low. Anybody ever heard that before? Anybody ever hear they have like low gums? I see a couple hands, but they're like this. You're like, I don't want to, that's between me and my dentist, bro. Like, I don't really want to share that with the room, but you go ahead and be bold with yourself. So no. So I have like low gums. And honestly, I think it's most likely because my mom just kind of pressured when I was in high school. I watched her pressure the orthodontist into taking my braces off early. I really don't know. I guess she just got tired of paying the guy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really know what that was about. But she's like, perfectionism, we don't need to worry about that with he's got plenty of problems, just what's one more in life. But if for some reason or other, like, things never really quite set right there. And so every time I went to the dentist, my whole adult life, every time I go to the dentist, I sit in the chair and they look at me and they go, hey, things overall are looking pretty good. And I'm like, great. And they say, hey, but the gums on your bottom teeth, they're pretty low. And I'm like, okay. And then that's kind of the end of the conversation. Oh, and they're usually like, oh, and you should floss. I'm like, okay. Appreciate the tip, Not doing that. So then I go home, and then 6 months later I go back, and sometimes you get a different dentist, and they look at your teeth, and they're like, hey, everything's looking pretty good, thanks, except your gums on your bottom teeth are pretty low. Heard that before? Like, yeah, and you should really start to floss. And I'm like, cool, appreciate the tip. So every 6 months this goes by, and this was years of my adult life, until about 10 years ago we moved. And I went to a different dentist, and we found a dentist, whatever, established care. We sit down in the chair, and he's looking at my teeth, and he says, hey, he goes, everything's looking pretty good. I said, thanks, appreciate that, He's like, except for your gums, they're looking pretty low. And I just decided to cut things off the past. I just looked at him, I said, yeah. I said, and this is the part where you tell me to floss. And he looks at me, he goes, yeah. But he said something no one had ever said to me before. He said, if you don't start flossing every day, you're not going to keep those teeth for life. Now, that hit different, okay? Like, I felt that deeply, Like, I went home and I started thinking about my future, and I'm like, all the things that I want to do in life and all the things, like, I enjoy doing in life, the food that I like to eat. I like standing up here in front of you, and talking to you about things. My wife tells me, she said to me many times, like, hey, if you don't have teeth, no one's going to listen to you. Like, you're just going to lose all the respect of people in the world if all your teeth fall out. Like, you got to pay attention to this. And I was like, yeah, So, like, he gave me a picture of my future. And I said, you know what? I actually want to do something about that. Now, he ran me into a principle. Like, he just shoved me straight headlong into the wall of a principle that you've experienced in one way or another, whether or not you've said it this way or not, right? And you experience not just in your dental hygiene, right? You experience this in all areas of life, right? And it's simply this, that your future you is determined by your daily you. You know this. Your future career is determined by and large by your daily work ethic. Your future education is determined by and large by your daily study habits. Your future marriage is determined by and large by your daily communication. Your future health is determined by and large by your daily eating habits, right? I mean, you know this, right? In fact, if you just say, like, hey, you show me one piece or show me one day of your life, and we can quickly get a decent picture of your future from that day, because your future you is determined by your daily you. Now, the thing with that is this, then. If we're going to experience the future that we desire, we have to win every single day. Now, today we're going to talk about a tool that we use specifically to help us bridge our future self with our daily self. There's a tool that we use in life, and you're taught to use this. You're taught to create this over and over again. You've learned about this before. The tool that we use over and over in life are goals, right? We set goals in life to help bridge our future self with our daily self, right? You establish goals in all kinds of areas of your life. By the way, this morning, I'm going to write a lot, and my handwriting's not the best. So if you go home today and you're like, I didn't really get anything out of church this morning. It's not because I didn't write anything helpful. It's just that you couldn't read it. So just bear that in mind this morning, all right? But you set goals in all kinds of areas of life, okay? And so for this morning, like, just to kind of kick us off, I actually want your help and kind of making a list of the types of goals that you set. I'm willing to bet that everybody in this room in one way, shape, or form has established some type of goal in your life. So I want you to think here for a second. I'm going to ask you actually to yell at me in a second to kind of create a list of the kinds of goals that you establish in your life. But just to kick us off, I'll get us going. Let's start with the most important area in which we set goals, right? Our dental hygiene, okay? Right? We start with that, right? Knock that out first. Beyond that, what are some of the types of goals that you establish or that you create in your life? Anybody got one that comes to mind real quick? Just kind of yell it out at me. Financial. Okay, I got a few. Quick. All right, we got financial goals, right? We establish goals in our life around our money, things that we want to save up for, or we just want to save in general, right? Somebody else said exercise. Did I hear exercise over there, right? Yep, fitness. We establish fitness or exercise goals in our life around what we want to eat or how we want to work off and lose what we just ate. What are some other areas that we create goals in, areas that we establish goals? What do you have? What's that? Grades, school, yep, our education. We have educational goals. Sometimes it's what grade we want to get in a certain class. Sometimes it's what school we want to get into. Sometimes it's what major we want to be able to be accepted into. Somebody else said something. What do you have? What's that? I'm missing it. I heard overall health. Is that right? I got overall health. Perfect. We set of goals in our health. What else we have? We have one or two more? Travel. I like that. That sounds good. Let's just focus on that one for the rest of the morning, okay? We set travel goals, right? Back to the financial goals. We set goals around our retirement. Anybody have a goal age for their retirement you've already established? Hey, I want to be done by, whoa, I heard 4. Who said 40? Let's go, Christy. All right, 40. You're like, now, like presently. You have one more for me? We're just going to call that, he said, buying the newest Fortnite battle pass. We're just going to call that money. I like it. Okay, now, anytime that we set a goal in our life, right, like anytime that you've ever established a goal, you were taught a way to kind of frame these goals out. In fact, people told you how to write goals in one way, shape, or form or other. And it all comes down to this. It's really simple. This is not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination, right? But the way that you were taught to write out your goals was to say, hey, I want to do something by this point in time, and you were taught always give a goal a deadline, right? Always put a deadline with it. Otherwise, you'll never do it, you know? So like always have a deadline for that. So you were told to write your goals out this way. Now, this morning, I just want to kind of acknowledge that there are a couple of problems that are inherent within the idea of establishing goals. Okay, there are a couple of problems or kind of ways that things that get in our way when it comes to the types of goals that we set. The first one is this. The first problem we want to run into is the problem of control. And here's what I mean by that. No goal is fully within your control. And you've experienced this, and I've experienced this. In fact, just a few years ago, I was training for a race, and I was training for a half marathon. I think it was my third or fourth half marathon. I brought the T-shirt. And the reason I brought the T-shirt is because I trained for this race, and I was ready to run my fastest half marathon time to date. In fact, I still haven't run fast. I still haven't broken my personal record. This was going to be the race where I would break my personal record. Okay, so I got the T-shirt. The problem is I never ran the race. The reason I ran the race, I trained for 5 to 6 months for this race. I was building upon years of training ahead of that point. So I was starting with like an established baseline and then trained for 5 to 6 months on top of that to train for this race. And then the week of the race, I got bronchitis. And ain't nobody got time for that, you know? And half of you got that, and the other half of you are like, I don't know what he just was referencing in that moment. Boy, I just dated myself big time with that meme right there, right? But I did. I got bronchitis. Now, I was like, all week, I'm like, I'm going to run this race, baby. I'm still doing this thing. In fact, my wife looked at me and was like, you're an idiot. Because the day before the race, with bronchitis, I went outside and I was like, I'm just going to see how far I can go. You know, let's see how well I can do. I didn't make it a mile. And I come in just hacking. I mean, it's like the fall. It's cold out. It's chilly. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't run the race. So I got the T-shirt, but didn't run the race. But I was like, you know what? I've trained for this race. I'm going to find another race, and I'm going to make up this race. And so we were traveling to see her family on Thanksgiving, and I was like, you know what sounds like a fun thing to do on Thanksgiving? Just run a half marathon, you know? And you're like, that sounds like a terrible way to spend Thanksgiving. But think about your in-laws and tell me whether or not you'd want to go run. I'm sorry. A half marathon. All right. So I'm like, I'm going to go spend the morning running a half marathon. Okay, so I signed up for a race. What I didn't realize is that Georgia is a little bit different than where I had trained. And so I show up for this race, and this race is in the hills of Georgia. And it's just up and down. And I mean, it feels like it's straight up and straight down the whole time. On top of that, okay, the race was kind of like I signed up for the cheapest race that I could find, okay? Sounds like me. And so I get there, and the signage wasn't that great. And so at one point, like, I missed a turn because there wasn't good signage. At another point, I missed a whole section of the course because the volunteer who was supposed to be at that part of the course to tell me which way to go hadn't gotten there yet. I was running so fast that I beat the volunteer to his job 3/4 of the way in the race. And so I just totally missed a whole section of the course, disqualified myself from the race, okay? So like I was trained for this race, I was ready for this race, and yet it felt like the universe was against me and my ability to run this race. I never hit my time. The reason is no goal is within my full control, no goal is within your full control, and you've experienced this before. Many of you have had education goals. You wanted to get a certain grade, or you wanted to get a certain GPA to get into that college, and you had a professor who seemed like they did not want you to get into that college. And they seemed like they were willing to do whatever it took to make it as hard as possible for you to get there. You've had career goals in your life, promotions that you were aspiring for, things that you thought you could achieve. And you knew that you had all the qualifications. You knew that you had all the certifications. You knew that your LinkedIn profile was better than anybody else's when it came to that opportunity. And yet someone still got in the way of that and decided that they were going to give it to somebody else. It doesn't matter what goal you set. Doesn't matter what direction you had, you were never in full control of any goal. Now, the second problem that comes when we start chasing our goals is not with control. The second problem that comes in the area of goals is with our development. You becoming the person that you're supposed to be, and my handwriting could use some development this morning. But development, right, we would simply just say this: you can accomplish all of the right goals in your life and still become the wrong person in your life. You can do all the right things, move in all the right directions, accomplish all the right things, and still become the wrong person. In fact, in the time of Jesus, there was a group of people who were so good at doing all of the right things, right? They checked every box. They accomplished every goal set for them. You gave them a to-do list. They knocked it out. It was a group of people known, many of you are familiar, a group of people known as the Pharisees. They did everything right. They did all the right things, especially when it came to their spirituality, and yet Jesus showed up, and Jesus had incredibly harsh words for them. Jesus said this to them. He said, "What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees?" He said, "Hypocrites, for you are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence." Now, you know people like this. You know people who look great on the outside, but on the inside, their life's a mess. People who get all of these things right, and yet the closer you get to them, the more you're repelled by them. For some of us, it's a parent or a family member that so many people look up to. They wake up before anybody else does. They get more done than anybody else does. They have all of this stuff figured out, and yet you live your life hoping to never become them one day. For some of us, it's a boss who's gone further than you've ever gone in your career, accomplished more than you've ever accomplished, checked every single box, and yet you hope you never become him or her. Some of us have dated people like this. And in fact, you were actually initially attracted to them because of all of the things that they had going on right in their life. But as you got to know them deeper and more deeply, you actually became repelled by the very person you were initially attracted to. And so we have to actually protect ourselves from becoming the kinds of people we never want to be in the process of pursuing all of the things that we hope to achieve. Now, there's a thing that we do that you and I have been taught to do to protect ourselves in the process of pursuing our goals. And we actually create guardrails for ourselves around our goals to protect us from becoming somebody we don't want to become. And the guardrails are all built around the idea of character, right? Who you are on the inside, the kind of person you are morally and ethically, the kind of person you become and are becoming. And we create all kinds of guardrails around our character. We say, hey, do everything you possibly can to achieve the financial goals that you have for your life. Do everything you possibly can to achieve the educational goals that you have for your life. Do everything you possibly can to get to the future that you desire, as long as you don't cheat, as long as you don't lie, as long as you don't steal, as long as you don't become unkind. And so we guardrail ourselves with character. We say, do everything you possibly can in these areas. Just make sure that you don't cross the line. And what's interesting about this is that we celebrate goals, but at the deepest level, you actually admire character. Now, think about this for a second, right? We throw parties for goals. When you retire, you get a party. You hit a milestone anniversary, you get a party. You win the championship, your team gets a party, right? You graduate from anything, you get a party, right? Like we celebrate the accomplishment of goals. And yet many times at those same parties, you find yourself in the corner talking to other people and hearing things about the person you're celebrating in that moment. And sometimes their character lives up to their accomplishments. But other times you find out that it doesn't. And if I were to ask you who you look up to the most, who you admire the most, if I were to say, hey, who do you most want to be like? You're not going to tell me about the person in your life with all of the accomplishments, most likely. And I hear this from you over and over again. You're going to tell me about the person in your life who you admire because of who they are at the deepest level. Many of you have told me about grandparents or aunts or uncles. It's usually 1 or 2 generations ahead of you. People who you look to as a guidepost and almost a North Star for your life. And when you tell me about them, you don't tell me about all of the things that they accomplished in their career. You don't tell me about what a great athlete he or she was. You don't tell me about how smart they were or how much they saved or how great their retirement was. What you tell me about is how kind they were, how loving they were, how patient they were, how others focused they were. And so we celebrate all of this stuff. But what we look up to the most and admire, the deepest level, is character. And I would just suggest this morning that perhaps it's because we know that at the deepest level, character is what matters most. Now, today we're going to jump into a piece of the scriptures. It's fascinating to me. It's a portion of scripture that's written by a guy by the name of Paul. Paul was one of the earliest leaders in the movement of Christianity. He's a fascinating guy, brilliant guy, one of the smartest, most well-educated, thoroughly educated leaders within the Christian faith. One of the most accomplished leaders within the Christian faith, went around planted church after church after church after church. In fact, many people credit Paul as the reason why Christianity spread so quickly throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Right? One of the most accomplished people within the Christian faith. And Paul, at the end of his life, found himself imprisoned because of his faith and the work that he'd done. And he was sitting in a Roman prison. And he wrote a letter. It's a letter called Ephesians that many scholars believe was actually not just a letter written specifically for one church, but actually a letter that was meant to be circulated among church after church after church. They would read the letter, and then they would send it off again to the next church, and that church would read it, and they'd send it off to the next church. It was a letter that was written not just for one group of Christians at one time, but for all Christians at all times. And now, 2,000 years later, you and I find ourselves reading the same letter this morning. And Paul kicks off a section of this letter. It's the 4th chapter of this letter. He kicks off that section of the letter with an interesting charge. He says this to them. He says, therefore I, a prisoner, I'm in chains right now. I, one of the most accomplished Christians, but can't do anything right now. Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Now, in this moment, he's writing from a position of not being able to do all that much, the most accomplished Christian of all time, now in a Roman prison, not able to do that much. And he writes now to Christians around the empire, and he says, hey, I'm begging you. I can't do anything right now. I'm begging you to lead a life that's worth the calling that you have, that's worth the movement that we're a part of. Now, what's interesting about this is what Paul writes next. Because you would expect Paul, the most accomplished Christian at the time, you would expect him to start charging them to go and do more things. Hey, carry forward the movement that I was a part of beginning. Hey, go launch more churches. Hey, go start new ministries. Hey, go start doing these things. But what he goes into next is fascinating. He does something completely different. Because this is what it looks like to lead that kind of life worth your calling. He says, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. He says, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. Now, I would expect him in this moment to start charging us to lead lives worth the calling we've been given by giving us a list of things for us to start doing. And yet he begins by telling us all of the things we ought to be being, the kinds of people who we ought to be. Now he continues to write in the next portion of the letter, he actually encourages unity among Christians, and then he actually acknowledges their difference in the midst of that unity. He says, however, he, God, has given each one of us a special gift through the generosity of Christ. As if to say, hey, you be united, be one, but also acknowledge that each of you has been given something that's different. Acknowledge that the creator of the universe, when he created you and when he redeemed you, actually gave you specific gifts for you to use to do good things in the world around you. Quite honestly, the same kinds of gifts, the same gifts that you use to pursue things like your education, to pursue things like your career, the gifts that you use in pursuit of your goals. He says, no, recognize that each of you has been given a special gift to be used. It's been given to you through the generosity of Christ. But why was it given is what's fascinating. When he talks about why it was given, he talks very little about the doing of us and far more about who we're developing to become in the use of those gifts. Look at what he says. He says, wait, once we use those gifts, then we will no longer be immature like children. Now, literally, the literal transition of this would be like, we will no longer be like little bitty babies. I mean, it's like the smallest of the teeniest of the tiniest of the kids, right? We'll no longer be like immature children. We won't be tossed and blown away by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us, when people try to, with lies so clever that they sound like the truth. In other words, when someone comes to you with a shortcut that seems too good to be true, it'll be very obvious to you in that moment that it's probably too good to be true. When someone comes to you with some kind of false teaching or incorrect teaching about your faith, you're going to recognize that really quickly. When someone comes to you and says, hey, here's a way to get rich really fast, you're going to recognize that quickly. When someone comes to you and says, hey, here's how to lose 30 pounds in 30 hours, you're going to recognize that really quickly. You're not going to fall for any of that stuff anymore. No. He goes, no. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way. How? More and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. Now, here's the thing underneath of everything that Paul's saying. We tend to believe that the most important part of our day is based around how much we got done, how many boxes we checked, how much progress we made in pursuit of the goals that we have. And yet, for Paul, imprisoned Paul, most accomplished Paul, when he charges the earliest Christians to lead lives worth the calling they've been giving, lead lives worth everything that they've been set up to pursue, he cares very little about how much they get done. And he cares a great deal about who they're becoming in the process of it. And in fact, Paul has actually just one goal for them. It's becoming more and more like Jesus. Now this is honestly a reversal from the way that most of us were taught to live. This is the inside out from how we were trained to operate and to think. And the point of all this, quite honestly, is that in your life and in mine, character, the thing that we talk about as a guardrail, character isn't the guardrail. It's the ultimate goal. It's actually the point of all of it. I mean, you know this. You can win the race and be the same person at the finish line as you were when you started training for the race. You can get the promotion and be the same person that you were years before when you started your career. You can get to the perfect retirement and be the same person you were when you graduated high school. You can do all of the right things and check all the right boxes and still not become the person that you were intended to be. So quite honestly, if we're going to establish the right kinds of goals that lead us to become the right kinds of people, we probably need to shift our relationship with our goals. It doesn't mean that we actually need to change our goals, It doesn't mean that we need to wipe the slate clean and never set goals, but we probably should be thinking a little bit deeper around our goals. And maybe we should start thinking about them like this. When we set goals, maybe we need to add a third line. And it's a simple line. It's such a small line, but it's the line we often neglect, right? Where we say, hey, I want to retire. I want to get into that college. I want to lose that weight. I want to be that much stronger by this point. Maybe we need to add to become whatever it is we've been created to become, which always points back to our character. And for the follower of Jesus, for those of us in the room who have said, hey, we're pursuing a relationship with Jesus in our lives and doing everything that we can to follow him, for the follower of Jesus, in one way, shape, or form, the answer to this, the answer to what we're becoming, is always in one shape or form, like Jesus. Now, just for fun, let me give us an example of this, because I had to process this week. And honestly, you guys have to listen to me for 30 minutes. I have to listen to myself every day for hours, so you tell me who's got the worst lot in that. I had to actually sit with this all week. And coming to the end of the week, I went, do I do this? Am I doing this? And so I actually had to think about the goals that I've been setting in my life and the things that I've been pursuing in my life. And I'll tell you about one of them. One of those goals, I shouldn't say this publicly because now you guys are going to hold me accountable to it. So that makes me nervous. One of the goals I recently set, and I had a friend who helped me kind of figure this out, was actually a goal around like strength training. I've always been a runner. I've never lifted weights. And the reason I've never lifted weights is I've always said, I'm just built like a runner, so I can't lift weights. And I had a friend who called me out on that not too long ago. He was like, hey, why don't you try lifting weights? You say you can't do it. Why don't you try? So I said, okay. So I actually set a goal for me to actually put on weight for the first time in my life and actually kind of build weight in myself. And I said, hey, I want to gain a certain amount of weight by a certain period of time. Now, this week, I had to look at that goal and go, okay, but am I actually thinking about my character at all in that? No, not really. So I actually had to process that. And I said, okay, what does looking more like Jesus actually look like? How do I experience that in the light of or in the context of this goal? And so I was like, you know what? I don't know what to do. So I just went to ChatGPT. And I said, ChatGPT, give me some scriptures that justify me putting on weight. You know, I was like, this could be helpful. And here's what I thought was fantastic. Luke 2:52. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature. So I just figure if Jesus got bigger, I should get bigger, And then I said, yeah, I could probably do a little bit better than that. And so I thought at another level. I went a little deeper. And here's where I came to. Here's what I recognized. I said, hey, Jesus in his very short time on earth, in fact, I've already lived more time on earth than Jesus did. Jesus in his very short time on earth continuously surrendered himself to things that created pain in his life for the sake of something greater in his life. And I said, hey, for me, if I can start the day by doing something that actually hurts, I don't always want to do it. I don't always get excited about it, but if I can start my day actually surrendering myself to a process that's going to be painful for the sake of something greater, what might that do to my mindset the rest of the day? When something unexpected comes in, when I get a phone call that I'm not prepared for, when I get dumped something on top of me that I'm not ready to carry, when something happens and I got to figure it out, how might it set my mindset for the day? If I've started my day by surrendering myself to a process that's creating pain in my life for the sake of something greater. Now, some of you, quite honestly, hear that and you go, yeah, that just kind of seems really simple. You're just kind of making that work. And honestly, I am. And here's why I use that as an example. Because I don't want us to complicate this to the point that we don't actually do it. And if we feel like we have to complicate it, and we feel like we have to have the best perfect answer and the most innately curated goals that spell out perfectly how you're going to become the most wonderful person in the world, and you're going to be the person that everybody looks up to and everybody wants to be like because of how much deep character that you have. If that's where the bar is, we're never going to do it. But quite honestly, we don't have to complicate this to do it. We just have to be intentional about doing it. And I would just say to you, every goal that you have in your life, in one way, shape, or form, has the potential to transform you, not just in what you're doing, but in who you're becoming. For some of us, you've got a fitness goal in your life. It's something around your eating, it's around working out, it's around fitness, it's around losing weight. Many of us have a goal like that in some way, shape, or form. And the reality of that is that you can start to look at that at a deeper level and recognize and say, hey, if Jesus was right, my body is actually a temple in which the Spirit of Jesus resides. And I actually carry that with me in every space that I go into. And so your goal around fitness and health just became a goal around becoming the type of temple that God's Spirit can dwell in, so that you can walk into each space with more energy. You can walk into each space with a clearer mind. You can walk into each space for longer. You can spend more time in this world being that temple and carrying God's Spirit into it. That goal around fitness isn't just a goal for you and your fitness. It doesn't have to be. It's actually a goal around how you carry God with you into every space that you walk into. Many of us have a goal around our finances. We have things that we're trying to save for, trying to get an emergency fund in place, just trying to be prepared for retirement. That goal has the potential to be fully about you. It also has the potential to be a goal that's built for the sake of your future generosity and you putting yourself in a position where you can continually live out the way of Jesus in the world around you by continually being generous toward the world around you. Listen, every goal that you have, every goal that you set, every goal that you establish has the potential to be a goal that leads you to become more of the person that you were created to be. Now, let me say this real quick before we wrap up. For most of us, this is a significant reversal from everything that you were taught and trained to believe, starting with your childhood. And the reason I say that is this. Your entire childhood, for most of us, the question that you got most often when it came to your future was this: what do you want to be when you grow up? You were asked that when you were 4 years old. And then you went into middle school, and you were asked that. And then you got into high school, and everyone started asking you that. And quite honestly, for most of us, your entire childhood was built around this question. Okay, so like your education was built around you being able to get into the school that might put you in a position to be the thing, to have the vocation that you hoped or maybe your parents hoped you could have one day. Your athletic career throughout school was all around setting you up for scholarships or setting you up for achievements or setting you up for trophies. Every piece of your life in some way, shape, or another for most of your childhood was actually curated around what you were going to be when you grow up. Here's the thing. Let me just say this before we wrap up. The creator of the universe, your heavenly Father, your entire childhood, he never cared about any of that. He wasn't nearly as concerned about what school you would go to. He wasn't nearly concerned about what job you would have. He wasn't nearly as concerned about how many trophies would be in your parents' attic 20 years later. He wasn't nearly concerned about how many certificates you would hang on the wall. He wasn't nearly as concerned about how many cords you would have around your neck when you walked across the stage at graduation. What he cared about at the deepest level was not what you were going to be when you grew up, but who you were going to become by the time that you got there. And if you and I will begin to reverse the mindset that we were given, if we'll begin to turn this whole thing inside out, we just might become the people that we were created to be. Let me pray for us as we wrap up this morning. Jesus, I thank you for the continual reminders that we have in our life that point us back to you and a deeper way of living. God, for those of us in the room this morning who walk in with all kinds of things that we're pursuing right now, God, would you shift our mindset in those areas? God, for those of us who have gotten caught up in or consumed by the thing we're trying to accomplish, God, would you help us to recenter ourselves and refocus ourselves on the kind of person that you created us to be? Would you help us to trust you to help us become it? God, for those of us in this room who walk in this morning, and our life has just been so chaotic that setting any kind of direction or setting any kind of goal or any kind of benchmark has just been off the table for a while. God, would you help us to recenter ourselves on the things that you're calling us to do? The things that you're pointing us towards, the things that we might pursue. But God, in the midst of setting those directions. Would you help us to remember that all of it is just a process? All of it is just the journey and the steps that we take in the process of becoming more like your Son. And God, would you help us to become more like your Son? We love you. We thank you for this. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Hey, thanks for spending the first part of your morning with us today. If